All right, just be straight with me. How badly did I mess this up? I know the answer is monumentally, but I need to hear it from someone else to make it feel real. I did something so incredibly, fundamentally stupid, and now I'm sitting on the floor of my living room. The indent on the couch cushion where he always sat seems to be mocking me. His favorite ugly coffee mug, the one I always teased him about, is sitting alone in the drying rack. The silence is so loud it feels like a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. My boyfriend, or I guess my ex-boyfriend now, is Torin. He's a geological prospector, which is almost comically fitting because the man is a rock. For 3 years, he has been the one solid, unshakable thing in my life. He's calm, patient, and has this quiet strength that made me feel safe for the first time ever. He was the kind of man who, after I mentioned it once, would pick every last bit of cilantro out of my takeout because he remembered I hated it. He was the anchor in the constant hurricane of my own making. But he had this one thing, this one non-negotiable rule. He was allergic to emotional games. It wasn't just a quirk or a preference. It felt more like a scar. He never talked about his ex before me in detail, but he once said that relationship was built on a foundation of tests and landmines, and he'd sworn he would never walk through that field again. No tests, no jealousy traps, no saying the opposite of what you mean. He told me once, very early on, that for him, trust wasn't the cherry on top of a relationship. It was the concrete foundation it was built on. He said, "The moment I feel like I'm being played, the whole structure comes down." And I listened. God, I swear I listened. I nodded, told him I understood, and thought it was the most mature, admirable thing I'd ever heard. I thought it would never, ever apply to us. Because why on earth would I detonate a bomb under the only safe place I'd ever known? To understand why I did it, you have to understand the ghost I've been living with. Before Torin, there was Daniel. And Daniel wasn't just a bad boyfriend, he was an architect of anxiety. Our entire 2-year relationship was a masterclass in emotional whiplash. One day, he'd be showering me with affection, telling me I was his entire world, making plans for a future I was naive enough to believe in. The next, he'd go cold for days over a perceived slight, leaving my texts on read, only to reappear with some flimsy excuse, making me feel so pathetically grateful for his attention that I'd apologize for things I didn't even do. He conditioned me. He trained my nervous system to equate the dizzying highs of reconciliation with love itself. He taught me that love was a thing you had to constantly fight for, a prize you had to prove you were worthy of, over and over again. The ground was never solid. It was quicksand, and I was always sinking, always grasping. When I met Torin, it was like stepping onto dry land for the first time. The stability he offered was so absolute, it was terrifying. There were no games, no mixed signals. If he said he would call at 8, my phone would ring at 8:01, and he'd apologize for being a minute late. If he said he loved me, his actions backed it up in 1,000 small, consistent ways that Daniel's grand, empty gestures never could. He learned how I took my coffee after the first time. He kept a spare pair of my favorite fuzzy socks at his place, just in case. He never made me guess where I stood, and for a while, it was bliss. It felt like I was finally healing. But the ghost of Daniel, the poison he'd injected deep into my psyche, was still there. That little voice in the back of my head, the one trained by years of uncertainty, just wouldn't shut up. It would whisper the most toxic things at the most peaceful moments. If Torin was away for a few days on a prospecting trip in some remote area with spotty service, the voice would start its insidious monologue. "See, he's pulling away. This is how it starts. He's met someone else." I'd spend hours scrolling through the social media of any woman who liked his posts from a week ago, my stomach churning with self-made acid. I'd reread our old texts, searching for a shift in tone that wasn't there. He'd eventually find a signal and call, his voice warm and steady, telling me about the rocks he'd found and how he couldn't wait to come home to me, and the relief I'd feel was so intense it was almost painful. I knew, on a rational level, that my fear was baseless. I knew Torin was not Daniel. I knew he was the most honest, dependable man I'd ever met. But that deep-seated, trauma-induced panic, that insatiable need for a dramatic display of reassurance, it was a sickness. It demanded proof, not logic. And eventually, that sickness convinced me that the only way to truly silence the fear was to stage the ultimate test. To push the big red button just to make sure the world would really explode. The night I did it was a Tuesday. A completely, painfully ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't usually get seared into your memory for all the wrong reasons. We had made dinner together, his specialty, a ridiculously hearty beef stew that simmered for hours and made the whole apartment smell like home. We were curled up on the couch, tangled in our favorite worn-out blanket, watching some mindless documentary about deep-sea creatures. His arm was a warm, heavy weight around me, and I was resting my head on his shoulder, his familiar, comforting scent of cedarwood and clean laundry filling my senses. It was perfect, domestic, stable, and it was that very perfection, that profound sense of peace, that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic through my body. The little voice, the ghost of Daniel, which had been quiet for weeks, suddenly screamed, "This is too good to be true. It's a mirage. You're about to lose it all. This is the calm before the storm." I could feel my heart start to pound against my ribs, a cold sweat prickling my skin. The narrative began to spin in my head, a toxic fantasy I was the sole author and audience of. He's just comfortable. He doesn't love you with the same passion anymore. If you were to disappear from his life, would he even fight for you? Or would he just move on? Daniel would have fought in his own twisted, destructive way. He would have yelled and thrown things and then begged, and that explosive cycle was what I had mistaken for passion. Torin's calm, his steadfastness, was suddenly, in my warped mind, a sign of indifference. I was an addict, and I had been clean for so long that my body was screaming for a relapse. I needed a fix of drama. I sat up, dislodging his arm. The sudden movement made him pause the TV. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Everything okay, Cress? You look like you've seen a ghost." And that was it. That was my opening. The sickness, the insecure little monster inside me, took the wheel. I remember a tiny, rational part of my brain screaming, "This is a terrible idea. This is the point of no return. Don't do this. Abort." But I ignored it. The craving was too strong. I needed the hit. I needed the drama, the validation, the desperate plea I was so arrogantly sure was coming. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice, to inject it with a convincing, somber tone I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. "Torin," I started, my voice barely a whisper. I don't think this is working anymore." I watched his face, my eyes scanning his features like a predator, hungry for the reaction I'd scripted. I had the whole scene mapped out. He would be shocked, devastated. He'd ask me why, what he did wrong. He'd pull me into his arms and tell me he couldn't live without me, that we could fix whatever was broken. I'd let him squirm for a few minutes, soaking in the delicious, validating agony of his fear, and then I'd relent, crying and telling him it was just a moment of panic. He'd hold me tighter, relieved and forgiving, and I'd finally feel secure. That was the script. That was the fix I was chasing. I looked him straight in the eye, my heart hammering in my chest, and delivered the stupidest, most destructive words of my life. "I think we should break up." Torin didn't follow my script. Not even a single line. My meticulously crafted drama, designed for a grand emotional climax, fell completely flat. There was no shock, no devastation, no immediate flood of panic in his eyes. Instead, there was just stillness. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable for a few long, agonizing seconds. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. In that suffocating silence, my smug certainty began to curdle into a cold, creeping dread. Then he blinked, slowly, as if he was waking from a dream and seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. He sat up, mirroring my posture, and a profound sadness washed over his face. It wasn't the frantic, desperate sadness I had craved. It was a quiet, weary disappointment that was 1,000 times worse. It was the look of a man who had trusted something to be solid, only to watch it crumble into dust in his hands. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical exhaustion, like a doctor looking at a patient who refuses to take their life-saving medicine. "Is that what you really want, Cressida?" he asked. His voice was unnervingly calm. There was no tremor, no pleading, no hint of the emotional chaos I had expected to unleash. It was just a question. A simple, direct question that demanded an honest answer, and I was standing on a stage of my own making, in the middle of a lie. My brain went into overdrive, scrambling to salvage the scene. This isn't right. He's supposed to be begging. He's calling your bluff. Double down, make it more convincing. So I did the only thing my sick, panicked mind could think of. I committed to the role. I hesitated, looked away towards the dark window as if wrestling with a painful, heart-wrenching decision, and gave a small, tragic nod. It was the worst acting of my life, and it was the most consequential. And that's when my world ended. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a reason. He simply accepted my performance as fact. He nodded back, a single, sharp dip of his chin. "Okay," he said. The word was so quiet, so devoid of emotion, yet it landed with the force of a physical blow. It was an acceptance, not a challenge. "I respect your decision." He stood up from the couch. The movement was fluid, decisive. I just stared at him, my mouth slightly agape, my entire internal script catching fire and turning to ash. This wasn't happening. This was the part where he was supposed to fight for me. "Torin, wait," I stammered, the game suddenly feeling horrifyingly, irreversibly real. My voice was a pathetic squeak. He stopped at the edge of the living room rug and looked back at me. For the first time, I saw past the disappointment and glimpsed the full depth of the wound I had just inflicted. It was a deep, structural wound. "I told you from the very beginning what my one rule was," he said, his voice still level, but now laced with a steely resolve I'd never heard before. "No games. No tests. I can't build a life with someone who needs to tear it down just to see if I'll rebuild it for them. I can't live with someone who needs to hurt me to feel secure. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to you. I'm sorry, Cressida, I really am, but I can't." The moment the word "can't" left his lips, the fog of my stupid, self-sabotaging game evaporated, replaced by the ice-cold clarity of reality. My carefully constructed stage fell apart, and I was left standing in the wreckage. "No, wait, Torin, I didn't mean it." The words tumbled out of me in a desperate, ugly rush. It was a joke, a test. It was just a stupid, horrible test. He just shook his head, a flicker of something close to pity in his eyes. "And you failed," he said, not cruelly, but as a statement of fact. "Or I did, it doesn't really matter." He turned and walked into our bedroom. The sound of a drawer opening was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I scrambled off the couch and followed him, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. He had pulled his duffel bag from the top of the closet and was methodically taking his t-shirts from the dresser and placing them inside. No anger, no frantic movements. Just a calm, efficient packing process that terrified me more than any screaming match ever could. "Please, just stop," I begged, grabbing his arm. "We can talk about this." I was scared. I was being an idiot, I know. He gently removed my hand from his arm. "There's nothing to talk about, Cressida. You showed me exactly what you think of me, and of us. You think our foundation is so weak that it needs to be stress-tested with a wrecking ball." For the next 2 hours, I was his shadow. A pathetic, weeping ghost trailing him through the apartment he was systematically erasing himself from. I pleaded. I apologized until my throat was raw. I explained about Daniel, about the trauma, about the voice in my head. I laid all my broken pieces at his feet, hoping he would stop and help me put them back together like he always did. But he just kept packing. His jaw was set, his movements deliberate. He packed his clothes, his toiletries, the worn-out geology textbooks on his nightstand. When the duffel bag was full, he grabbed a couple of cardboard boxes from the hall closet and started on his other things. The whole time, I was sending a frantic barrage of texts to his phone, which was sitting on the counter. "I love you. Please don't do this. I made a mistake." The screen remained dark. Finally, as he zipped up the last box, I saw him pick up his phone. He glanced at the screen, his thumb moved, and then he put it in his pocket. A moment later, I tried to send another message. A small, gray notification popped up beneath my desperate plea. Message failed to send. He had blocked me, while standing 10 feet away from me. The finality of it knocked the air from my lungs. He picked up his bags, walked to the door, and for the last time, he looked at me. "Goodbye, Cressida." And then he was gone. The click of the deadbolt locking behind him was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. For the first few days, I existed in a state of suspended animation, a thick fog of denial and disbelief. I kept expecting him to walk back through the door, to call me, and say it was all a huge overreaction. This had to be his version of a test, right? A cruel, silent lesson. He'd made his point, and soon he would come back. He had to. I left his side of the bed untouched. I didn't wash his coffee mug. The apartment became a museum of a life that had ended just days before. By day 4, the denial started to crack, and pure, animalistic panic set in. I needed to talk to someone who knew us both, someone who could act as a bridge across the chasm I had created. I called Ava. Ava was our mutual friend, the one who had introduced us. She was always the level-headed one, the voice of reason. I sobbed into the phone, recounting the entire pathetic story, framing myself as the tragic, trauma-scarred victim of my own foolishness. I expected sympathy. I expected her to say, "Oh, Cress, he's just hurt. I'll talk to him. Give it a few days." Instead, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't warm or comforting. It was tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. "Cressida," she said, and the way she used my full name felt like a slap. "What did you honestly expect to happen? You, of all people, know about his past. You know what his ex did to him. He told you. He trusted you with that." Her voice wasn't angry, but it was sharp with a brutal honesty I wasn't prepared for. "He spent years rebuilding himself after that. You knew his biggest fear was being emotionally manipulated, and you looked him in the eye and did it anyway. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." Her words didn't offer a bridge. They dynamited the very ground I was standing on. After we hung up, I wandered through the apartment in a daze, her words echoing in my head. I started cleaning, a frantic, desperate attempt to do something. I was clearing out the drawer of the desk in our spare room, his desk, when I saw it. Tucked in the back, underneath a stack of old field notes, was his tablet. He'd forgotten it. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was a violation of the privacy of a man who no longer wanted me in his life. But I couldn't stop myself. I opened his web browser. The search history was still there, and the top 2 results made my stomach drop to the floor. The first was a link to a local, independent jewelry designer known for unique, custom engagement rings. The second, from just the week before, was a search query: best quiet places to propose near the city. I stared at the screen, the light from it illuminating my tear-streaked face in the dark room. It wasn't just a relationship I had destroyed with my stupid, selfish test. I had destroyed a future. He wasn't just comfortable. He was planning the rest of our lives. It's been 3 weeks now. The fog of denial has completely lifted, leaving behind the stark, ugly landscape of my new reality. The apartment doesn't feel like a museum anymore. It just feels empty. His absence is a tangible thing, a hole in the fabric of my daily life that I keep tripping into. I quit my job last week. I just couldn't focus, couldn't pretend to care about deadlines and spreadsheets when my entire world had been reduced to a single, looping reel of my own failure. My life now has a sick, pathetic rhythm. I sleep until noon, ignore the concerned texts from my family, and then, as the sun goes down, the ritual begins. I have a separate Instagram account, a ghost account with no name and no followers that I created the day after he left. And every night, I open it. I type his name into the search bar, my thumb hovering over his profile picture for a second before I click. He hasn't blocked this account. He probably doesn't even know it exists. And he hasn't posted anything dramatic. There are no sad quotes, no angry rants, no pictures with a new girl. It's worse than that. He's just living. There's a picture of him and our friends, including Ava, on a hike. He's smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. Ava is looking at him, not me. There's a short video of him at a fishing spot we used to go to, the sun setting over the water. And last night, he posted a picture that shattered what was left of my heart. It was a photo of a small, scruffy terrier mix sitting on his lap. The caption read, "Decided I needed a co-pilot. Meet Buster." Every post is a fresh stab. Every picture of him moving on, of his life continuing to exist and even flourish without me, is a testament to the fact that I was not his anchor. I was the storm he finally escaped. I refreshed the page over and over, a digital self-flagellation, hoping for, what? A sign of regret, a hint that he misses me. There is nothing. There is only his life, moving forward, and mine, stuck here in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of a screen. I built this hell for myself, this digital prison where I am both the inmate and the warden. And every night, with a trembling finger, I press refresh and sentence myself to another day.